Well, certainly, when you read about the peace plan, read the Le Monde today, and naturally you may think, I mean, what does it have to do with reality? These are entirely two different things. There is a peace plan, which maybe some lunatics posed. This is the reality of fighting. I think, and Mr. al-Kidwa, there could be no better time to raise these ideas than now, because of the fact that we are engaged in a brutal war, which has to be ended as soon as possible. And there is no way to end this and to move forward from it, but to discuss in a serious way what can be the only possible solution for the historical conflict between us and the Palestinians. And this is, number one, we have to end the war in Gaza and in Lebanon. It doesn't depend on us, obviously, because our adversaries are waging this. And you mentioned the Iranian attack on Israel a few days ago with 200 ballistic missiles. Unbelievable. Never heard of, never happened in a modern history that one country was attacked by 200 ballistic missiles, which have warheads of approximately 1,000 kilos each. So this has to end. But part of the effort to end it is to propose an alternative, to propose something for the day after. How can we move forward? How can we prevent it from happening again? How can we create an entirely different relations between Israel and the Palestinians? We thought that this the only way. What we have proposed is based on the peace plan that I presented the president of the Palestinian Authority in 2008 when I was minister. And Mr. al-Kidwa shares with me the basic principles, and that's what we are trying now to raise. And we try, and we'll go everywhere in the world, in Europe, in America, in South America, to try and force this to the agenda of the international community.
Look, given your position, Ehud, you clearly have an audience, both internationally and within Israel, the respect that you command. But I'm just aware, and just to clarify, because the idea involves a two-state solution. It's coming 4 months now after the Knesset, Israel's parliament, overwhelmingly voted on a resolution against a two-state solution. I just wonder how much traction you think you can get. And it's something that perhaps you've pointed to then, with time, that you want this returned to, if not now, and also why you think this plan might work when the US and French ceasefire plan fell on deaf ears only last week.
I'll tell you what I'm trying to share with the Israelis, and I know that there are quite a few more that are joining in with the same perspective. Let's assume, just for the sake of our discussion, okay, that in the end, other months, 2 months, 3 months, we will have destroyed every single Hamas operation. We will wipe out all Hamas. There will not be Hamas anymore. Hezbollah is a different story. We will not have Hamas.
Yeah.
We'll be left with 6 million people, Palestinians.
Yeah.
What are we to do with them? The question I ask everyone, okay, we have destroyed Hamas, we killed everyone, we have reached out for Yahya Sinwar, we killed him, no Hamas anymore, okay? Then what? We're left with 6 million Palestinians. What do we want to do? Do we want to continue to occupy the territories forever and engage in terrorist confrontations on a daily basis and be condemned by the international community and lose the status, the prestige, the respect that we have entertained in the international community for so many years?
Yeah.
We have to make, and the Palestinians, there are enough Palestinians that understand that there is no alternative but a two-state solution with a Palestinian state alongside the state of Israel, non-militarized Palestinian state, which is what we, Mr. al-Kidwa and myself, agreed and published.
But it kind of feels, Ehud, like shouting at the moon that it must right now to the Israeli government, which on the far right of the government talk about, and you'll hear this phrase a lot, escalate to de-escalate. Tell me what you think about what you would like to see the Netanyahu government, specifically regarding Iran, next. You talked about this barrage. It has been unseen before. The fortuitous nature that only one person appears to have been killed. As one of your successors, Naftali Bennett, said this week, the focus should be on an attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. He talks about, as we can see from his tweet on X, this being the moment to reshape the Middle East. It's escalation to de-escalate. What do you think?
Tell me something. Had France been attacked by not an Arab country from a distance with 200 ballistic missiles, what do you expect France to do? Not to respond, not to relate to it, just to let it go and say, okay, there were no people killed, so we can absorb it somehow. Of course, Israel has to react, and Israel will react, and this is something which is universally accepted in Israel. Question is, what kind of... Are we going to go after people and kill innocent people in the center of Tehran or any other city? Absolutely not. I'm totally against it, and I think the overwhelming majority of Israelis are against it. We have to act in a manner which will not trigger an expansion of this confrontation, but rather perhaps signal to Iran that it's not worthwhile to attack Israel with ballistic missiles so that we can move forward away from it. But if there will not be any response, I'm afraid that the Iranians will think that we were devastated and that they carry on. By the way, in any event, I don't think that we have to attack the nuclear facilities. I don't know that we can do that. And in any event, I think that this is something that has to be determined by the United States. If the United States will decide that it needs to be done, they will know how to do it, and they have the capabilities.
For those listening, and your words matter here as a former Israeli Prime Minister, and are thinking about the state of play when it comes to Israel's allies, first of all, the US. Let me ask you the question that back in 2006, during the 34-day war, when you were in command, the kind of conversations you were having with the Americans, the information, the words of wisdom, perhaps, or the encouragement, given that we're not seeing what it appears to be turning a blind eye and falling on deaf ears, any comments from Joe Biden, is that something that would be alien to you back in 2006, that level of dialogue being perhaps ignored?
First of all, I must say I have wonderful relations, trust relations, with President Bush, George W. Bush, who was an excellent, absolutely trustworthy, and with Condoleezza Rice, who was Secretary of State. Now, throughout the 34 days, I didn't speak even one time with President Bush. He didn't need to send me any message, and he didn't want to talk to me, and we used to talk frequently. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice came a couple of times to visit. She never demanded anything. She never thought that what we were doing was absolutely out of place. I decided from the beginning, from day one, from the first minute, that the Hezbollah started this. By the way, at the end of the war, a couple of weeks later, the Nasser, who was targeted a couple of weeks ago by Israel, at that time, say 2 weeks after the war, had he known 1% of Israeli action, he wouldn't have started the whole thing, and he regretted it. Now, but when I was in charge, I tried to focus fighting against Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. We destroyed the section of Beirut, which was gated and was the headquarters of Hezbollah, with all the command positions, with all the launchers and whatever. But we refrained from shooting at civilians, and we made sure before we started to attack the Dahya section of Beirut that all of the residents of this section were outside of it, so that we had a greater degree of flexibility. That's what I believe we are trying to do now. Israel is not after civilians. Israel is after the killers and the murderers. Don't forget, you mentioned and I heard your correspondent talking about the people in Beirut. 80,000 Israelis in the north are away from their homes for 1 year already because of their attacks on a daily basis by Hezbollah coming from Beirut, coming from Lebanon against Israel. Hundreds of rockets every day on civilian centers in Israel, including today and yesterday. So somehow...
Yeah. Which is why I guess you would advocate more clearly, more loudly your peace plan. Why it needs to come back to Gaza. I would also like to know what you make of the war of words between the French president here, Emmanuel Macron, and Benjamin Netanyahu. In the last few minutes, as we're talking on air, in fact, the Elysee Palace saying that there is an unwavering support for Israel. So words of diplomacy, trying to emoliate and smooth over what's been happening. Let's remind those who've just been watching of the events of the past 24 hours. So Emmanuel Macron called for Western allies to halt arms supplies to Israel if weapons shipments are being sent for use in Gaza. The Israeli Prime Minister responded directly with what he called a message to Macron. This is part of the exchange.
If we are calling for a ceasefire, consistency means not supplying arms for war. Those who provide arms cannot simultaneously call for a ceasefire and continue to supply them.
As Israel fights the forces of barbarism led by Iran, all civilized countries should be standing firmly by Israel's side. Yet President Macron and some other Western leaders are now calling for an arms embargo against Israel. Shame on them.
Shame on them. Ehud, what do you make of this geopolitical fallout?
First of all, I know it will not make me very popular in some circles in Israel, but I have to say I like President Macron, and I think he is, and I don't think that he is an enemy of the state of Israel, and he has manifested it throughout this last year in many occasions. So I have enormous respect for him. Personally, I think that it was a mistake to suggest an embargo of weapons to the state of Israel at the time that 200 ballistic missiles are shot at us, 100 of rockets are shot at us from Lebanon by the Hezbollah. Hamas continues its war, and we need to somehow fight it through. What I think, and I have suggested. And by the way, I have to say, I don't like the rhetoric of Benjamin Netanyahu. It is well known. I'm not his supporter, to put it mildly. I think that he's arrogant, he's outrageous, and nothing to do with France or with the president of France. We want Netanyahu to go home as soon as possible, and the sooner the better for Israel.
Well, let me quote you, Ehud, on a recent interview you gave a month ago. You said this. You said, what makes a great leader is the ability when the time comes to do the opposite of what you've ever promised to do. This needs to be done now, you say. You went on to say Netanyahu is not Churchill. He's not Roosevelt. He's not even Neville Chamberlain. Tell me what you mean by that. And what do you think Churchill would do now, faced with this situation?
Well, he would have done long ago. Churchill would have prevented the 7th of October. This is the greatest failure of Netanyahu, the greatest failure in the history of the state of Israel. And as some people say, your colleague Tom Friedman at the New York Times called him the worst leader in the history of Jewish people. He was the prime minister. He flirted with Hamas. He believed that if he can buy Hamas with money and physical assistance, and they will somehow acquiesce and they will not attack the state of Israel. This was a major, monumental mistake of judgment by the Prime Minister of Israel, and he can't forgive himself for doing it, so he is blaming the whole world. So this is Netanyahu. He pretends to be Churchill. He is not Churchill. Churchill would have prevented the October long before it would actually take place. And the same is Roosevelt. But Bibi Netanyahu, unfortunately, thinks that he is not just Churchill, that he is Churchill and Roosevelt. And I say that he's not even Chamberlain. Well, but what I think is very important, by the way, in this context that we talk, I think that the war in the north can conclude. There can be a compromise. And I presented it to the French government as well as to the American government, a plan that I have drafted with experts of intelligence and knowledgeable about the history of the region there that can bring an end to this and an agreement of some sort between us and the Lebanese government.
Yeah.
And the French government be very active
Yeah.
in dealing with it.